Hi, this is PG of PG's Lumacy. In this tutorial, we will be making the donkey for the Rainbow Loom Nativity Series. We will be making this project on a single rainbow loom, and it will be in the offset configuration, which means that the pins are staggered and the arrow will be pointing downwards, and we will be placing bands from the top going towards the bottom. The colors that we will be using for this project will be gray from the original Rainbow Loom line and black, and we will also be using light gray. But if you cannot find light gray bands because these are not original Rainbow Loom bands, you could use white as an alternative. Because we are using only one loom for this project, we have to prepare the other parts of the donkey beforehand before placing the bands for the main body. Let us start placing bands for the snout, and we will be using light gray double bands, or you could use white double bands. Unless otherwise specified, we will be using double bands for this project. Let us place the first row of gray, light gray double bands on the topmost pins. And then for the next row of bands, we place light gray double bands on the next center pins. And from this center pin to this side pin, we will place double gray bands in a diagonal. And we will do that again for the other side. To define the shape of the snout, we will place a double looped band on these pins. And to do a double loop band, we get a single band. We twist it and then fold it to itself to form a double loop. And we place that on these pins. And then we will place a cap band on this pin, and we will wrap that cap band on this pin 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. Now let us loop the bands for the snout. Go into the cap band and grab the bands that are on top, and in my case it is these bands. So I go into the cap band and grab the double bands and loop them to the forward pin. And then we go for these bands. We grab them, get them out, and then loop them to their forward pin on the side. And then we grab the center bands and loop them to the forward pin on the center. Now let us loop these vertical bands. And that is the looping for the bands for the snout. Now we need to secure these loops separately so that we could place them on the head of the main figure. And we will be using toothpicks for that. I place toothpicks into these loops, and then one at a time I get them out of, I get the loops out of the pins until they rest on the toothpick. And then I grab the toothpicks, put them together, and then pull the entire piece of the loom. And there you have the bands for the snout. You could fine-tune the shape when it is already on the figure. This time, let us prepare the ears, and you could use any 4 pins on the loom that form a diamond. So in this case, I will be using these pins on the loom. And for the inner ear, we will be using pink bands. Let us first place single gray bands on the loom. And these are darker gray bands. These are the original Rainbow Loom Gray. And compared to the other brand that I got, they are darker. So let us place them on our diamond. Place one vertical on the center pin. And then from this center pin to this pin on the right, we place a band, a single band in a diagonal. And then we place a vertical band from this pin to this pin. And lastly, we place a single gray band from this pin to that pin, forming a diamond. And I'd like to remind you, these are all single gray bands. And then we place our pink bands for the inner ear. And it might be a good idea, because we will be doing this in layers, to push down the gray bands. And we place the pink band on this center pin, and another single pink band from this center pin to this pin on the right to get to that layout. Then we will place a horizontal band on these pins, and we will wrap that band 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. So it will be a triple looped band that we have here. A single band that is looped 3 times on these pins. And then as a cap band, we place a cap band on this pin, and we wrap that on this pin 4 times. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that is how we do the layout for the ears. Now I want you to pay attention to the looping, because this is quite different from the usual looping that we have done so far on the action figures. First, we grab the pink band from underneath the cap band, and we loop it to its forward pin on the center. And then we grab the pink band underneath and loop that to this forward pin. And we might need to release it by doing this on these bands. And we will get to this result when we do that. Now we have to release these pink bands from this pin. And to do that, we first grab the one on the top to release it. And then we go inside this triple loop band and grab the pink band, and then get it away from this pin. and we will get this result. The reason why we had to do this is so when we make the ears, we will have the pink bands showing as the inner ear for our donkey. And with that, we could now loop the gray bands. So we go underneath the cap band once again and get the band that is on top, the single band that's on top, and it is this one. And then go for the next one, which is that one. And then loop the next gray bands. We get this one first, and we will have to release it. You will have that, and then you grab this one and you loop it to this pin, and you will have to release it. So this will be the resulting layout when you're done looping the ear. Again, we grab a toothpick and secure those bands because we will be placing them later on the head of the donkey, and then reinforcing the loops with the hook, get them out of the pin, hold on to the toothpick as well, and then pull the entire piece of the loom and get the hook out, and you will have this piece for the ears. You will have to even out the stretching for the bands so that the ear will look longish rather than roundish, because we're trying to simulate the ears of a donkey, and you will get that. I already made one earlier, so now we have 2 ears for the donkey. We also have to prepare the legs for the donkey, and this would be the hind legs, and we will be placing 4 rows of bands. So I just do it on the bottommost pins on the loom. I need 4 rows, so I start with these pins over here, and I start with 2 bands. And then another 2 gray bands on this pair of pins. And then another 2 bands on this side. Now I will place 3 gray bands. And to simulate a hoof, I will place 3 black bands. And I will cap that with a black band, a single black band, wrapped 4 times on this pin. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then let us loop these bands. Please pay attention to the looping. We grab the triple bands from underneath the cap band, and you might want to hold the cap band with your thumb and then loop to the forward pin, and then grab the triple gray bands and then loop to the forward pin. and then grab these double bands, and instead of looping them on this forward pin, we will loop them to this pin. Did you get that? So instead of going from here to here, we went from here to here. And then we will loop the remaining double bands. And again, we have to secure the end loops with toothpicks because we will be setting this piece aside until we are ready to use it. We just get the loops off the loom, then get the entire piece off the loom, and that will be the piece for the arms. And now, to prepare it for attachment to the main body, please take note of this, we will carefully pull out the toothpicks. And then we will get these loops on one side together and secure them with the toothpick. And then we will also put these loops on the other side onto another toothpick until you get that. See, I do it that way because it just looks better and adds more volume or bulk to our thigh part for the donkey. And let's do one more of this for the other leg. You might have missed what I did with the first leg, so I decided to show the last part of the making of the leg to you. I'm just right now getting the piece off the loom. Okay, you see, as we get the piece off the loom, these loops are on one toothpick and these loops are on the other toothpick. But what we want to do is to get these loops together and these loops together. So what we can do is to pull the toothpick carefully out of the loops, and then we get the loops that we want to be together onto those toothpicks. And that will be these loops, and that will be the other set of loops until we get this. And we now have 2 legs for our donkey. One last piece we have to prepare would be the head for the donkey, and we will be using double bands, gray double bands. We place this double band on the center pin, and then from this pin, second from the top to the top center pin, we place a diagonal band, and we do that on the other side. And then we place 2 rows of vertical bands on these pins. in the last row of bands will be placed in this way. We place the center bands vertically on the center, and then diagonal bands on the sides. And then we cap these bands with a single band wrapped 3 times on this pin. 1, 2, and 3. Then let us place the horizontal bands that will hold the headpiece together. Let us place double looped bands on these pins. You twist a single band, fold it to itself to form a double loop band, and then you place it on these pins. Let's do that again. And another. Now let us loop the bands for the head, and please pay attention to the order in which we will do it. And before we do that looping, we can now place the ears on these pins second from the top. So this is the earpiece we made beforehand. We pull out the toothpick very carefully and then replace that with the hook. And then place all those loops onto that pin. You might want to have the ear in an upright position so you don't have to do a lot of twisting later on. And let's do that again for the other ear. You might find it easier to, before pulling out the toothpick, to insert the hook so the bands will still be together when you insert the hook, and then pull out the toothpick later. It's up to you. When you place the ears, make sure that the pink inner ear is showing, because on one side it will not be showing as much. So make sure you pick the side where the pink bands are showing more, and that will be the front part of the ears. And make sure you place them on the loom like so. Okay, so let's place that. Let's place the ear on the pin. Okay, I hold it down just so it doesn't slip off this pin, because we have a rather thick layer of bands already. Okay, and that's how we place the ears on the headpiece. So now let us loop the bands. This is the double bands on top, so I will loop them first. I go into the cap band and then grab that pair of bands and then loop it to the forward pin. Then I go for these bands next. if you are not seeing these neat teardrop shapes, then you may have looped the bands in the different order, in the wrong order. So just redo the work, so you will get these neat teardrop shapes. Now when you're done looping the bands, the bottommost bands on the headpiece, that is now the time for you to place the snout. Remember the snout that we prepared at the start? And the snout has 3 loops: center, left, and right. And these loops will go to the center, the left, and the right pins on the loom. Being very careful, pull out the toothpick, starting with the center loops. And like we did with the ears, you might want to insert the hook into the loops before you pull out the toothpick so they don't get undone. And then place the loops on the pins where they're supposed to be. And this time these are the center loops, so I place them on the center pin. And you have to be very careful that they all get in there. There are 4 bands total forming this loop, so they have to be there. And you could push downwards so they'll be more secure. Now with the center loops in place, we could work on the loops on the sides. And like we did earlier, just insert the hook into these loops and then pull out the toothpick and then place them on their pin. I hope I'm not covering with my hand. Okay, there you go. Let's work on this other side again. Very carefully, we place the hook into the loops and then pull out the toothpick that is securing them, and then very carefully place all the loops onto their pin. And that is the snout piece that we have now placed on the headpiece. Now let us loop the bands on the head. The vertical bands are easier to loop. Just make sure you're getting the bottom most a pair. We're getting this bands this time. And then these bands. Just put them onto the pin on top of the ear pieces and then loop the center bands. Now when we get to the top of the loom, let us first do the side bands and then do the center bands. Okay, just go for this bands on the bottom Okay, we're getting to those bands. We grab them and very carefully get them out of the pin. This is a thick layer. This is where bands usually are broken. So very carefully just loop them to the forward pin on the top. Let's do that on the other side. We're looking for these bands. Okay. And then grab the center bands and then loop them to the topmost center pin. So that is how the head piece looks like when it is looped. You might want to pause the video and check to see if you have the same layout. Now before you secure these top loops with a single band, first place a black single band that is wrapped 3 times onto this pin. 1, 2, and 3. And then we secure that with a gray single band. Get into all the bands, the loops, then get a single band and then tie a knot up top. Okay, and then don't pull on this band too much. You could secure it more when your bands are off the loom. Then I usually hang it on my left forefinger so it's out of the way, and then I place my hook into all those loops to reinforce them and then get them off the pin. And if needed, I do the same with the other heavy layers of bands, just so they are reinforced. And they're not stretched too much. Okay, get the entire piece off the loom. And there you have the headpiece. You could start fine-tuning the shape of the headpiece. Like I want this area to be narrower, and I want the snout, the end of the snout, to be wider. So I just pull it outwards and then pinch it inwards, and then I even out the stretching on the bands. Okay. Then I make sure that this band is fastened securely so my loops will not be undone. You will want this to be underneath so it gives your snout a roundish appearance. You see, if it's here, it looks like your donkey has a puckered lips, but if you put it underneath, it kind of gives the snout a roundish shape. And then pinch. For those of you wanting to do Eeyore, you might be able to tweak this design and you will get Eeyore. When you pull on these bands, the earpiece will point upwards. Okay. When you pull on these bands over here, your earpiece will point upwards, and that is what we want for our donkey. Okay. Just even out the stretching on the bands to get to the shape that you want. Okay. That is the head for our donkey, and we will work on the main body, and we will attach this head to the main body. Let us now place the bands for the main body of the donkey, and pay attention to how we place the bands and the number of bands that we place at each step. So first, let us place diagonal bands on the topmost pins. And then we will place 6 rows of bands on the center pins. And for those 6 rows, I place 2 bands for the first one, and then 3 bands for the second, 3 bands for the third, a pair or 2 bands for the fourth, 3 for the fifth, and then 2 for the sixth. So let's review that. We have 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 2. That will make sense when we start shaping our donkey later. And for the side bands, we will just be placing 6 rows of double bands. Let us start with this side. That was 6 rows of double bands, gray double bands on one side. Now let us do that on the other side as well. That was 6 rows of double bands on this side. Now, grab another pair of bands and place them in a diagonal on these pins. Let's do that on the other side as well. Now let us place the bands for the legs. This would be the front legs of the donkey. Okay, take note of the number of bands that we are placing at each step. 2 gray bands. Next, we place 3 gray bands. And for the hoof, we place 3 black bands. And then we cap that with a single band wrapped 3 times on this pin. 1, 2, and 3. Let's do that again on the other side for the other leg. So that is how the layout will look like when you are done placing the vertical bands and the diagonal bands. You might want to pause the video and check to see if you have the same layout. Now let us place the horizontal bands that will hold these bands together and also define the shape of the piece. So we place a single band on these pins, another single band on these pins, and then another single band on these pins. Then for the next row of pins, we will be placing a double loop band, and to do that we twist a band, fold it to itself, and it will form a double loop, and we place it on these pins. And let's do that again for the next row of pins. You twist it, fold it to itself, and then it will form a double loop band. Then you place it on these pins. So that is how the layout will look with the horizontal bands. Just to review, we have a single band, single band, single band, a double loop band, and a double loop band. You might want to pause the video and check to see if you have the same layout. Before you start looping the bands, don't forget to place the body parts that you have made beforehand in their respective places on the layout. Starting with the hind legs. For the hind legs, we will be placing the two, remember we formed two end loops for the hind legs, so they will be placed on these two pins. So once again, you get the hook onto the loops and then pull out the toothpick and then place the loops on their pin. Then do that for the other side. Place the hook into the loops, pull out the toothpick, and then place the loops on the pin. Okay, so that's the hind leg. Let's do that on this other side. The head will be attached to this pin over here. But we will do that when we are done looping the bands below that section. So let us first loop the bands in the leg area. Just grab the triple bands underneath the cap band and then loop to the forward pin. Let's do that again for this other leg. When we get to this section, we first loop these diagonal bands before we loop the other bands. So let's grab these diagonal bands and then loop them to the center pin. Do that on the other side. And then now we loop this row of bands. And when you get to that part, you are now ready to attach the head to the body. And you might need to find a way to remind yourself to place the head, because you might get carried away and loop the bands all the way upwards. Then you will have no way of attaching the head neatly and securely to the main body. That is what happened when I was doing the prototype. I forgot to place the head at this part, and so I just, attach it with a toothpick just to get it going. But you don't want that in your final product. So find a way to remind yourself that you will be placing the head at this time at this section. So to do that, you grab the cap band that we use to secure the headpiece, and we will place it on this pin. Okay, that's the cap band, and your donkey will be facing you when you do that. Okay, so now we are ready to loop the bands going from the bottom towards the top. Let's do that. Now when you get to these sections where the leg pieces are attached, you have to remember that there are bands underneath the legs. This is usually the area where people forget to loop these bands, and their projects fall apart. So remember that there are vertical bands underneath the leg pieces, and let's go for that. Okay, this is one. We grab them and then loop to the forward pin. Okay, and on the other side, it would be these bands. So let's grab them and then loop to the forward pin. And then we loop the center band. Okay, so that is how it will look like when you are done looping the bands. Now let us secure these end loops with a single band. Just get it into all those loops and tie a knot with it. And then don't pull on it too much. You will break it if you do. And then reinforce these loops with the hook and then get them out of the pin. Every time there is a heavy layer of bands that you're getting off the loom, it will be good to do it this way so they are not stretched out too much. Okay, and you can just pull them out if they're just thin layers of bands. And here we get the figure just off the loom. All we need to do now is to stretch the bands and begin to fine-tune the shape. We are beginning to get the three-dimensional look of the donkey. From this section over here, we sort of fold the entire piece. You can do that, and the bands will respond, and you could pull out the bands, and if you pull these bands outwards, it will fold your legs downwards. See that? And then you could pull in the head by pulling out the bands from underneath. Okay. And then these legs, if you wanted to fold them downwards, you pull on the pieces that are holding on to them. When you pull these bands out, your legs will begin to fold downwards. When you pull these bands out, your legs will begin to point downwards. So just experiment which bands to pull out. You will see them respond like I'm showing you right now. Okay, and then push your thumb into the bottom side so it will have a 3D-ish look, and it will begin to take shape as you do this. Fold this front part and then pull on the bands as needed. Like if I pull these bands out, the legs will fold out that way, fold down that way. Okay. And then if I pull these bands out, you see how it bowed down. So what I do is pull those bands on the other side so it will tilt itself up, its head up. And look at the snout, it's pointing forward. So you pull these bands out and the snout will point downwards. And that is how you fine-tune the shape of your donkey. For the ears, you pull these bands out and the ears will point upwards. The more that you work with these figures, the more that you will know which bands to pull out, which bands to push in, so that you will get the shape that you want, especially when you are posing them. The display figures that you're making, this is the way to get them to the shape that you want. Okay. I wanted the head to be pulled into the shape, into the figure, so I am pulling on the bands that are holding it from beneath. Okay, so it will be pulled into the figure. Now if you wanted more hair running from the top of your donkey's head to the back, this is how you do it. You get a black single band and then you wrap it 3 times on the hook, and then you thread this band that you use to secure the top and just thread it into those bands, those loops that you formed, and then you could use a finer crochet hook for this. Just loop the band onto one of the bands in the back, And then you get another black band, and then you loop that 3 times on a hook, and then you loop or thread that gray band again, and then secure it again to one of the band pieces in the back. Okay, probably just one more. You could do as many as you like. Just loop 3 times and then thread the band into there. Okay, and secure it to one of the bands in the back of the head. Secure it, tie a knot, or secure it with a C-clip. It's up to you how you want to secure it. Just make sure it's secured. Okay. Might be safer to secure it with a C-clip, but since I will just be using this as a display piece, kids will not be playing with it, I will just tuck this end of the band into the bands on the head, on the back of the head. See? So it will just stay there. And you have the hairs on the back of the head, just even out the looping. There you have it, the donkey for the Nativity series.